Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we're going to talk about repainting miniatures. So this is a common question that often comes up. To strip or to repaint. And I oftentimes see a lot of people talk about, like, they say, well, I started painting the miniature and I didn't like it, so I stripped it and then I started over. And I will openly admit this is something that has baffled me. I mean, I have stripped miniatures before in my life, but it's extremely rare. And so I thought it'd be interesting to talk about under what circumstances do I think you should strip a miniature and start from scratch versus when you should just paint over it and call it a day and treat it as something else. Right now I'm in the middle of reforming, reforging, remaking, whatever, my Slaanesh. That's why I have this Herald out here. The next couple of models I'm tackling are these Heralds. I had painted these several years back, and you know, they're just not really up to snuff with sort of the current standard of where I want to be. They don't match exactly to the color scheme. There's a lot more things I'm doing with them now, right? And so what I've been doing is just taking each individual miniature and adding additional paint to it, right? I haven't been stripping them down. I've just been literally, you know, building on what's already there, right? So for example, in the case of, you know, these girls, one of the things I want to do is I'm darkening like the purple and the depth of the hair, increasing the contrast, you know, stuff like that. So one of the things I'm making sure of is that I go in and deepen all these colors, add some more paint, pop out highlights, stuff like that. So for example, with this girl, you know, she's fine as a base. No need to completely reinvent the wheel here. So I've already got, you know, the purple on my palette here. So what I would do is just come in, get some of that purple fairly watered down that I'm using as my low color, right? And then come in and push some of that down into the shadows. And then grab some more of it, and over here on like her claw, where I want to deepen this area of the contrast, you know, effectively I'm putting like a pretty light purple wash on there, really is what's happening. I mean, I'm not using a wash, I'm using a real paint. But the principle here is basically the same, right? And so on and so forth. Now, not all of it's just color shifting. In this case, I'm usually turning a lot of the robes blue. So, you know, perhaps I would go and repaint her actual robes, but I would just start and put a new color over the top of it, you know, grab like a fairly opaque paint and go over the top. So in this case, like, I feel no need to strip this model. It just seems like a terrible waste of time when I can do, you know, I've already redone 40 Daemonettes and a bunch of other models, and I never stripped a thing. So I thought it'd be interesting to explore when do you strip and when do you repaint. So for our second reference, I want to bring in Mr. Ogre here. Now this guy has shown up in just a ton of videos. He's green from a recent display of the Nostalgia 88 paints on his back. And, you know, he's got all sorts of colors all over him. I have put layer after layer of paint on this guy. And I mean, this guy's got pretty deep detail, but nothing is obscured. All the little threads are still just as there as they were before. You know, everything has more or less remained. So again, if I was going to repaint this ogre, even though I've used him in, I don't know, let's be generous and say 10 videos, putting different paint on him every time, I would still just repaint him again from scratch. Right, or sorry, from where he's at now. I wouldn't strip him or anything. Let's go back farther. This is an old Alariel. This is the Alariel, the Everqueen from, like, God, I don't know, the 90s at least. As you can see, she's not, you know, greatly painted. But again, the paint on her, like, I look at her and I say, okay, how much is the detail obscured? And that's really the first dividing question I ask. How much is whatever paint is on there actually obscuring the detail? So in this case, she still her eyes are still nice and called out. I can still see her lips, her nose. Everything is still well defined. The folds in her cloth the detail on her staff, right? These little gems and the sort of rings around them. A little bird here, and the divots in between his wing are still visible. The hair, like her hair still has all this, normal texture we would expect and everything like that. So again, in this case, now I probably wouldn't strip her. I'd probably just start from wherever she is. Like, her dress is probably going to be white anyways. Her skin's going to be roughly skin colored. So most of this is just a base coat that's going to put me in an undershading situation of where I want to be. This does lead me, though, to the second place I'm more likely, from my perspective, to strip. And there's a difference here between... That sounded really ironic. Boy, that's going to look really funny if you have the subtitles on. From the perspective of where I'm more likely to be willing to strip the paint off the miniature. And that is metal versus plastic. Like, this is the old... That doesn't ting, but you get the idea. The old metal Everqueen. And metal miniatures in general are easier to strip because they're much harder to damage. You can scrape and scrub paint off them easier. It doesn't, it doesn't lock in as hard to the plastic like it does to plastic. And you can really get a good scrub in on them. Like, you can use a fairly aggressive brush on them and not, injure the miniature. When it comes to like metal miniatures, I mean, you can use like brake fluid to strip stuff off of them. I mean, you can use really powerful solvents and chemicals, and you won't hurt the miniature. You can't do that with plastic. With plastic, you want to use something like Purple Power or something like that, something that's safe for plastic. There's lots of good online resources where they list all the potential chemical strippers, what will eat plastic, what will eat resin, what will eat, metal, because there are things out there that will even damage and eat away metal. So the first thing I look at is how thick is the paint and how much is it obscure detail. The most common place I end up stripping paint off of miniatures is when I get something off eBay where someone has just applied the paint with like just house paint with a size 72 brush, right? In those cases, I will tend, especially when I buy older figs, I'll tend to go the distance and strip them. If it's one of my paint jobs and I'm just updating it, if I'm just sort of either maybe changing a few colors or taking a color scheme to the next level, or even changing something. Like if this guy, if I was going to go all the way and just make him into a green orc, I would just finish what I started here. Like when I started that earlier, I just put another layer of green over and he's good to go. Like now he's green skinned, and I'd probably go the rest of the way with that. As it is right now, he's got this weird, this very weird patterning on him. It looks kind of cool. I kind of want to do like a weird green troll army where the front of them is skin colored and the back of them is green. That'd be kind of a cool color. So your question might be, what would you strip? So I went and found this guy in my collection. So this is the old metal Eltharion from the 90s, who was on Griffin or whatever, and he's his Griffin is in 10 pieces. I mean, this guy he's seen better days. When I look at him, first of all, there is a lot of places where paint is quite thick. Okay, like especially here in his chest area, here around the side of his helmet. But in addition to that, you see how filthy he is? Like this guy, I mean, to be fair, this fig is 20 plus years old and he lived a lot of his life sitting out in like a garage, just exposed, semi-exposed to the elements. He's had a rough life. Poor Eltharion here. And he's so dirty, the paint is so all over the place, it's so uneven. And that comes to the third element. And again, this is much more common with metal miniatures, is how well was the paint applied originally? You see where the paint is scraping here? On this part where it was very thin, and yet here where it's very thick? So what I can see is that the paint was applied very unevenly and is not of a good quality. So when it comes to something like that, I'm hesitant to lay down like a new coat of primer over the top and just start painting over that, because the primer's not sticking to something reliable. So whereas with some of the other metal miniatures that I have, when I've repainted them, I've just literally put a new layer of primer over and started over. It's because I painted it originally, and I know that I, primed it with, two basically nice thinned coats of primer, and then went over it with a zenithal, and then, proceeded to paint from there with some relatively thin layers. And so I know the sort of foundational elements that if I just started over and reprimed the thing, it would be fine. right? It would still, whatever's there that I'm putting on top is going to be just as reliable and sticky as anything new. Okay? So I think this is where, you know, you can sort of see the progression here, right? From like, here, let me see if I can get these guys all on camera together. Painted once by me, and I just want to update, right? No question here in my mind, this does not get stripped. Even though I want to change some colors completely, I'm still just going to paint over the top of this. I'm not repriming it, okay? I'm just adding in new colors and painting it. I painted this originally. It's been painted one time. I know the paint was put on thin, and you know, in nice controlled thin coats. I'm ready to go. So no question, this one falls into the don't strip it, just keep painting pile. The way I see models like this, by the way, is if you've ever taken a model or taken your army to like tabletop standard and then thought, oh, I'll go back and do it later, right? I'll go back and I'll take it to the next level. This is the kind of thing that, like, I don't understand why people strip miniatures because they painted something wrong. Just keep painting. It's the same thing as what you would do here. Because when you're going to take something up to a new, well, you say, well, yeah, but I want to make, you know, area A a different color or area B painted completely differently. Okay. In the journey from like basic tabletop to higher quality, you're probably going to do the same thing. You're going to turn highlights from just the flat version of the color into something quite different. You're going to edge. You're going to do all these things. It's the same story. Then we progress to here where, you know, I painted it and I painted it originally, but I've put a ton of layers on this guy. Here I might go ahead and reprime him just to get a nice even coat back over everything and then do my painting because he's had a lot of work on him. But still, I haven't obscured any of the detail. I mean, even after all those layers, look at how clear and clean the like ridges on his face are and his lips and his teeth and all that, right? This guy's ready to go. Nice thin layer of primer. Knock him out. Here we come to like the dividing line. This old Everqueen, you know, I didn't paint her. She was painted 25 years ago, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And you know, the paint is like thin in how it's applied. Like I can tell it's not obscuring any detail because I can still see it all in here. Like even the very fine detail, like look for the finest possible detail and make sure you can still see it. Like here in her hand, she's holding this gem along, and then it's got that like ridge line on it. You can see how well defined that still is. That tells me we're not obscuring detail, right? That and the face is usually a good place to look. And so the fact that that's fine tells me, yeah, I'd probably just give this a new prime. But it's made of metal, it's easy to strip, it's easy to get clean. If you wanted to strip something like this, that seems okay. Like this is the dividing line I would see you falling on either side of, and that's fair. And then finally is this guy. Paint is uneven, paint is already chipping, so it's unreliable. We've got 20 years of filth and dirt. You know, we've got thick paint, we've got paint that's too thin. This is a guy, he's going in the bath. No question, right? He's on that side of the line. Like, no way I start on this guy without putting him in, scraping him clean, and making sure he's good to go. So that's kind of how I think about it. I realize this isn't like a straight tutorial, but this question comes up a lot as to, you know, when do you repaint versus when do you strip? And so I thought it'd be interesting to just talk it through with some examples and show you how I think about it. So there you go. I hope that's helpful. I hope that gives you some things to think about. I don't want to see people waste time stripping away their paint jobs when they just start on something new and it's a relatively clean single paint job, and like you decide you want to turn these claws from purple pink to, you know, blue green. Okay, just do that. You don't need to strip the whole mini and start over. Like that's a terrible waste of your life and time. Unless you like applied your first layer with house paint and obscured all the detail, which obviously then you have other bad habits you need to deal with. But to me, it's like, just keep going, keep pushing paint. You know, I'll be in cases where, because I paint in thin layers, sometimes I'll have 3-4 dozen layers of paint on something, like how many times I've gone back and forth over it. It doesn't obscure any detail. Paint is in nanometers effectively when you're laying it down that thin, right? So there you go. that's my thoughts on stripping versus repainting. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, give it a like. Subscribe for additional hobby cheating in the future. There's new videos here every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. If you want to come take a class with me, there's a link down in the description. I teach all over the country. Be happy to have you along in a class. But as always, I very much appreciate you watching this one, and we'll see you next time.